1. I don't usually talk about this, mostly because I don't care to relive what happened that night, and because I've already filed a report, so there's no need to dwell on it. But I've decided to talk about it now, so maybe people will become more aware of walking around at night, especially young girls like myself. It was early April, or maybe it was May. I honestly can't remember. And I had decided to go to my friend's house for the weekend. She had just moved into a trailer park that seemed nice. It was clean and well taken care of. Everybody was friendly and knew each other. Well, almost everybody was friendly. This incident took place around 8:30 p.m., so the sun had been down for a little while. My friend's mother had gone to bed around 7, having to be up for work at 2 a.m. The boy across the narrow road had come to my friend's window and asked if we wanted to hang out. We said yes. I told my friend's mother that we were going outside and would be back soon. I grabbed my phone and put it in my pocket. Where my friend lives, unless you have Verizon, you won't have good service, if any. I, unfortunately, had AT&T, and my friend didn't bring her phone. Neither did the boy. That was mistake number 1. The second mistake was agreeing to leave our yards and go to the park a few streets away. The trailer park is its own little community, with its own playground. We lived about 3-4 streets away. The 3 of us, ages 13 and 14, walked to the park. I was the oldest, but also the easiest to be scared. My severe, untreated anxiety made the situation worse. As we were walking towards the park, the boy, his name is Colin, said that he saw some people there already. Lisa, the girl I was staying with, said it was fine. Mistake number 3. We kept walking towards the park. At the park there was a picnic table. That's where we planned on sitting. As we continued walking by, I saw puffs of smoke coming from it. It was obvious the people there were getting high. I knew one of the 3 boys. His name was Kevin. I had met Kevin once before. He had dated Lisa for a short amount of time and then broke up with her. We continued walking past them when Kevin shouted out, "Want to have some fun?" The 3 of us continued walking and turned the corner. Too bad the playground was at the corner, so they could clearly see us. There were woods right next to the road we were on, which scared me quite a bit. Lisa had begun walking backwards, keeping an eye on them, but she turned around to see where she was walking. And that's when the boys would run to catch up to us. Lisa turned around and saw them closer, and ran to the end of the road, waiting at the stop sign for us, but then returning. Colin, the youngest of all of us, told us to keep walking, and that he tried to stop them getting closer. I've never run so fast in my life. I sprinted down the street after I saw what they did to him. I remember him walking to them, and them crowding around him and walking closer to the woods. I figured they were going to take him in there. I ran past Lisa and continued about halfway down that road before I stopped and waited for her. She had asthma, and the last thing we needed was to be separated as well. Apparently Kevin had turned the corner with the other boys and were walking over to us. Lisa screamed at me to run, so once again, I made another mistake and ran off without her, or any form of self-defense. I ran down that road and turned the corner onto our street, and ran about halfway, stopping under the streetlight. I was afraid that one of the boys would be in her yard waiting for me. I heard Lisa shouting my name, so I turned, waiting for her to catch up to me. She told me what had happened to her. Kevin was walking over to me and he took out a knife. I told him to leave me alone and not come any closer, or else I'd kick him in the crotch. He left me alone after that. The 2 of us walked to her house. We had no idea where Colin was. When we got to her driveway, we saw the 3 boys come to us through her yard. They had obviously cut through people's lawns to get there so quickly. Lisa had said, "Get off my fucking lawn before I call the cops." I was on the phone with my long-distance boyfriend. Kevin replied with, "What did I do?" To which she said, "You know what you did." I remember looking up and seeing one of the boys looking me up and down. He also said, "Hey, what you doing?" I rolled my eyes and walked inside. The two of us were shaking and in tears. We still didn't know where Colin was. I sat in my friend's room and looked out the window, seeing someone walking down the road. I thought it was Kevin, but it wasn't. Luckily, it was Colin. This is what he told me. "I walked over to them, and they all huddled around me. One of them held me while Kevin put his arm around my neck and put a knife up to my face, saying, 'What are you gonna do?' I kind of zoned out for a minute. Then he pulled out a pocket knife. Colin said, he gave me the knife and said he didn't want to get caught with it. It was dangerous for him to be outside alone, so he went back to his house, and Lisa and I spent the rest of our night making sure the windows and doors were shut and locked. It was so stupid of me not to call the police. But 1, I didn't know where I was. 2, I didn't remember that they could track my phone. And 3, I didn't have any service until I got back to the house. By then, I didn't know where the boys went. And I also didn't know her address or think that the police could track my phone. All I have to say is just be careful when you're walking around at night. The situation could have been a lot worse, and you can't trust anybody. 2. So I'm 16 now, but my parents gave me an early birthday present and let me go to a hockey game. The Pittsburgh Penguins and Washington Capitals were facing off for Game 1 in Washington. I'm a Penguins fan, and it's not easy living in DC with a whole bunch of Caps fans. But it made me a Penguins fanatic because I am behind enemy lines, if you know what I'm saying. The community is terrible in DC, and this story I am telling will prove my point. All the times I have been in DC, there have been some sort of crime happening around the area I was in. Anyway, enough with the background. My mom dropped me off at the metro. That would drop me off to my dad at the Verizon Center. My mom, being overprotective as always, had a hard time letting me go alone. But it would be convenient because she had to watch my brothers, and my dad worked in DC anyway. She didn't take her eyes off me until I got on the metro, and then texted me until I lost service. Now, until I reached the first stop of many, it was really crowded, so I felt comfortable. But when we stopped, everyone got off, and the only ones left were me and this really suspicious-looking person sitting right in front of me. Yeah, I was scared shitless for some reason, and the things my mom told me before didn't make me feel better at all. The guy looked about 6'3", and I was only 5'5" or something. And I wasn't that strong either. I took off my earbuds and looked down at my phone, constantly turning off and on airplane mode, because that usually worked. I glanced up real quick, which was a huge mistake. The guy had a hoodie on. I could barely see his face, but it was pale, and I felt an evil presence. I looked down at my phone again, and as soon as I hit the power button, "You a Christian boy?" he said. How did he know? It couldn't have been my cross necklace because that was behind my shirt. I couldn't tell if he, or it, was asking a question or stating a comment. So I said, "Well, yes, sir, I am." I have kind of a high voice, which sucked, but I tried to make it sound as low and manly as I could. The trembling in my voice didn't sell it, though. "It wasn't a question, boy," he responded with an angry tone. We stopped at the next stop. I really wanted to look to see if anyone was getting on. I ended up not looking because I thought it was smart, but no. No one ended up getting on. What are the odds? This has to be the scariest experience of my life. 3 more stops, I thought to myself, trying to think as optimistically as I could. But it didn't do anything at all. It wasn't the answer. The doors closed, Here we go again. Why didn't I get off, you ask? Well, I was basically in shock. I didn't want to move. In fact, I couldn't move. Something was holding me down. The metro began moving again. The whole ride to the next stop. All he did was stare at me with a furious look. Why did he care if I was Christian? I really didn't understand. My mind was just focused on the next stop. The door opened, and to my surprise, no one got on. Once again, this just didn't make sense. Today was a big day for DC. The Capitals and Penguins were rivals. I was expecting for at least one Caps fan to get on the metro. The man smiled and then started making noises and shaking his hands. That's when I finally realized I was sitting across from someone who was evil. He couldn't have been insane. He was insanely evil. That's when I figured out the answer. It was God. Sorry if being a Christian and including God in this story offends you. I silently prayed for a bit, and as I did, this guy got angrier and angrier. It just wasn't right. I wanted to stop in fear that he would hurt me. But prayer was the most dangerous weapon to me, especially at this time. The doors opened and he shot up. I thought he was leaving, but I was terribly wrong. He stomped right over me and stood over me. I almost had a heart attack and curled up in a ball, bracing for death, but he didn't hurt me. Obviously, no one got on again, which I knew because he was still standing over me. Probably blasphemy and spitting all over me in the process. It just kept going. I reached the final stop I was to get off at. The doors opened, and I all of a sudden stood up because I felt strong and courageous. He was still standing there and talking to himself. I really didn't care. I just walked out into the open. Still nobody. But as soon as I walked up some stairs, it was like in front of me was the most people I had seen in my life. I struggled to find my dad, but that was the end of it. I tried to explain it to my dad, but all he said was, "Yeah, right, and let's go." Anyway, this will stay with me until the grave. And I'm so glad I grew up in a strong Christian family. But the message was not only stay strong in Christ, which is a really important one, but to always be scared. After all, it is what keeps us alive. 3. Several years ago, I worked at a job in Texas, where most evenings I was home at a normal time. But about once per week, I would get home anywhere between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., depending on deadlines. I lived in an area that wasn't super nice, but it wasn't known for being particularly dangerous either. It was a neighborhood full of apartment complexes that is still a very popular area for young, single people to live. So there are always people coming and going at all hours. But everyone was always very nice and friendly. I was in my early 20s, and a bit naive at the time. But I had watched enough true crime television to know a few rules about being a single gal in the city, and how to react in a potentially dangerous situation. Up until a certain point, though. It was all just warnings and cautionary tales. One night, after an especially long day and a chaotic race to meet some hard deadlines, I arrived home way later than usual. Since it was so late, all the good parking spots were taken. But I parked my car as close to my building as I could, under a street lamp, just like my dad taught me. I held my bag close to my body, and I started walking toward my apartment, with my head up and my eyes peeled. I learned in a self-defense class that predators look for weak targets who aren't paying attention to their surroundings. As I was walking toward my apartment, I noticed a guy walking toward me from the opposite end of the sidewalk. I'd never seen him before, which was odd. This meant he was either a guest of one of my neighbors, or he was new, or he was trouble. There are parts of this encounter that I remember so vividly, I will never forget what this guy was wearing. He had on black denim pants and a solid black long-sleeved shirt in the middle of the summer, in Texas. I also remember that he was completely bald and very pale. and even though his style reminded me a lot of my art school friends, something about him gave me an unshakably creepy feeling. It was a T-shaped sidewalk we were walking on, so if we continued to walk toward each other at the same pace, we would eventually meet at the intersection of the sidewalk at the same time, where I would turn right, his left, to go between the buildings and toward my apartment door. And to my left, his right, would be the parking lot. Since I was still close enough to my car that I could get back to it quickly if I needed to, I slowed my pace just a bit, to make it so he was ahead of me, so I could see what he would do. Would he go ahead of me and turn left to go between the buildings toward an apartment? Or turn right and go into the parking lot and leave? I kept my eyes on him the whole time. I had read in 17 magazine or somewhere that if you make eye contact with a potential attacker, they are less likely to go through with their attack because they know you have seen their face and can identify them in a lineup. Just as he was getting to the intersection of the sidewalk, a few steps ahead of me, he stopped and took a step off the curb to his right onto the parking lot surface. And, with his left foot still on the curb, he leaned in between two cars and looked into one of the windows. This pause closed the gap between us that I had created by slowing my pace. Just as I was starting to round the corner to head toward my apartment, he quickly turned his head toward me like a robot, zeroing in on its next target, and we locked eyes. He didn't smile, or raise a hand to wave or greet me in any way like a neighbor would. His face remained expressionless, almost stern. My blood ran cold. As I continued turning the corner, I held eye contact with him as long as possible, and he didn't look away from me either. At this point, I had nowhere to run. I could only continue forward and hope to make it to my apartment safely, because he was now in between me and the path to my car, or any other exit. Just as I was about to break eye contact with him, to look where I was going, I saw his right foot leave the parking lot, and he shifted his weight back onto the sidewalk and started following me. It was very obvious that he had only stopped there so that I would walk ahead of him. This is the part where I lose any and all memory of what happened. I don't know if I teleported, or was carried by angels, or if I was just so terrified by the look on his face and his sudden change of direction that I blacked out for a little bit while I sprinted like hell. 1 second I was turning the corner to walk away from him, and the next, I'm inside my apartment scrambling to lock the deadbolts as fast as humanly possible. Once the deadbolts were locked, I plastered my face up against the door to look out of the peephole to see if he was out there. I saw nothing. No one. He wasn't walking up and down the sidewalk, and he wasn't lurking in the corridor where my apartment door and several others were located. My roommate must have heard me slam the door and throw my things down, and fiddle with the locks because she came out of her room and down the hall to the front door to find out what the hell was going on. It was obvious that I woke her up from a deep sleep. On a weeknight, no less. I felt terrible for waking her up, and I tried to explain to her what had just happened. But I had no idea how to explain it. Even right then, in the moment right after it happened, I had zero recollection of how I made it from the edge of the parking lot to inside our apartment 30 feet away. It was, and still is, so strange to try to figure out. I've been racking my brain ever since, trying to remember what happened in those few seconds, but it's just gone. Did I experience some sort of miracle that night? I don't know. What I do know is that if I had not been so aware of my surroundings, had I not been so bold as to look him in the eye, this story could have ended in a very different way. Others have not been so lucky. So stay safe out there, ladies and gents. Walk strongly, walk with confidence, keep your head up, and pay attention to your surroundings, not your phone. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to True Scary Stories episode 87. I'm thinking we should be able to have another TIFU this Saturday. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, but I have 3 stories already. I actually got those because I was kind of scrambling to find stories for last week's, and people got back to me after I had enough. And probably paranormal on Friday, and I haven't got a clue what I'm doing on Thursday. Not sure. Keep saying I'm gonna start the novels, which I'm definitely going to do at some point, so I'm not going to keep promising it. It'll just show up one day. Anything else? Let me see. Well, this has nothing to do with scary stories, but I am about to embark on an adventure. I'm going to attempt to make vegan macaroni and cheese, simply because I wasn't aware such a thing was even possible. Got all the ingredients today. One of them was so hard to find I had to order it off Amazon. So wish me luck and much yumminess. No, I think that's about it for now, actually. Yeah. Okay. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.